Hello everybody, welcome back to History of Spriggs. My name is Spriggs, and today we'll be talking about the War of 1812. The War of 1812. It started when the British captured American sailors, forced them to join the British Navy, and when the British traded arms with the Native Americans. And the Native Americans used the arms against the resistance of the settling of the Northwest Territory. This rose the tensions of Britain and America. Also, in 1807, when the British attacked and sank the USS Chesapeake off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia, and when in 1811, when Tecumseh gathered a Confederated Indian force and attacked General William Henry Harrison at the Battle of Tippecanoe. This started Tecumseh's War. This was basically the fire for the War of 1812. General Hull departed from Cincinnati May 10th, 1812, to deliver goods and troops to supply Fort Detroit. The U.S. declared war on the British June 18th, 1812, but the letter didn't arrive to General Hull, stating that the declaration of war until July 2nd. So basically, by the time he was already in enemy territory, by the time he got the letter. Then, he built the Cuyahoga Packet, because he was going to attack Fort Amherstburg. But the Cuyahoga Packet, carrying the plans to attack it, was captured by the British, and they held off the attack. Hull wanted to build a fleet to protect Forts Dearborn, modern-day Chicago, Fort Detroit, modern-day Detroit, and Fort Mackinac, which is on Mackinac Island. But this did not happen. Hull began invading the Sandwich area, now modern-day Windsor, Canada, across the Detroit River from Detroit. And on August 7th, 1812, Hull crossed the Detroit River into America, after receiving news that Major Van Horn's men were attacked. Hull feared of a Native American attack. Major General Brock tried to attack Fort Detroit, but Hull surrendered, believing that Brock's force was bigger than his, because Brock tricked him into thinking that his combined British Native American force was greater than his. But in all reality, Hull could have took him on pretty easily, especially with the home ground defense of Fort Detroit. And Hull ordered the evacuation of Fort Dearborn to Fort Wayne, but the evacuating civilians and soldiers were attacked by the Potawatomi people outside of the fort, and the Potawatomi burnt Fort Dearborn too. After, Brock sailed east towards the Niagara River, where General Van Rensselaer attempted to invade Canada, but was defeated at Queenston Heights. However, General Brock was killed during the Battle of Queenston Heights. After Hull surrendered, General William Henry Harrison, also the future president, took command over the Northwest Army. His goal was to retake the city of Detroit. Harrison sent a detachment to help take Detroit, but were defeated at the Battle of Frenchtown, or the Battle of River Raisin. His goal In May of 1813, Proctor sent a detachment to help. Proctor sent a detachment and Tecumseh's Confederacy to take Fort Meigs. They besieged it, but was unsuccessful. They tried it again and was also unsuccessful. They left and they tried to take Fort Stephenson at a small garrison, modern-day Fremont, Ohio, close to Cleveland, where they wanted Harrison to make his headquarters. And Cleveland wasn't the powerhouse it is today, but it was one of the biggest cities in Ohio. But he was defeated, even though the British greatly outnumbered Fort Stephenson's garrison, and Fort Stephenson only had one old French cannon from mid-1700s called Old Betsy. That cannon was able to defend off the British. Then the Battle of Lake Erie on December 10th, 1812. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry's decisive victory around South Bass Island, then Isle de Flores, which is French for Island of Flowers, secured Lake Erie. Then the Americans retook Fort Detroit. And on October 5th, 1813, the Battle of the Thames, where Tecumseh was killed. This ended basically the Northwest Confederacy. The Mississippi Valley only had settlements at St. Louis and around the city. There were many trading posts and forts, though. Fort Osage was the most western of these forts, built in 1808, but was abandoned at the beginning of the war. Fort Madison, constructed in 1808, but was attacked many times by Native Americans since the beginning of the war. It was Fort Madison, built in 1808, it was attacked many times. The Americans held it until 1813, until the Indians took it. In 1813, April 27th, Commodore Chauncey and General Dearborn attacked York, now Toronto, and burnt it, which was the capital of Upper Canada. The British retreated, leaving the militia to surrender. The Americans did not occupy the city, but the Americans burned the city. On May 25th, 1813, from Fort Niagara, the Americans attacked Fort George and won, without much losses. The British abandoned Fort Erie and headed towards Burlington Heights, and the Iroquois considered changing sides. The Americans did not pursue the British until they had mainly escaped at the Battle of Stony Creek. But this was a big mistake, because if they did, they would have defeated this force of the British. But instead, at the Battle of Stony Creek, June 5th, the British had launched a surprise attack at 2 a.m., leading to confused fighting and a British strategic victory. The Americans pushed back to the 40-mile creek. Then the Iroquois ambushed while the Royal Navy bombarded the American camp. General Dearborn thought he was outnumbered and retreated to Fort George. An American force surrendered on June 24th, 1813 to a smaller British force force due to advance warnings by Laura Secord at the Battle of Beaver Dams. This was the end of American offensive in Upper Canada. Major General Francis D. Rottenberg did not have enough strength to take Fort George. Commodore James Yeo attacked the major shipbuilding harbor, Sackett's Harbor. At the battle, Americans repulsed the British. In late 1813, Americans abandoned Fort George and set fire to the town of Newark, now Niagara-on-the-Lake. Without shelter, the Canadians freeze to death that winter. December 18th, the British took Fort Niagara. December 19th, Battle of Lewiston, New York. The British burn Buffalo in revenge for burning Newark. Battle of Ogdensburg, and Americans were forced to retreat. February 21st. In 1813, America sent General Wade Hampton north from Lake Champlain and met up with Wilkinson at Sackett's Harbor to sail to Montreal. Hampton's men were defeated at the Battle of Chateauguay, and Wilkinson's men were defeated at the Battle of Chrysler's Farm, 90 miles outside of Montreal. On July 27th, Red Sticks were returning from Pensacola with a pack train when Americans attacked because of alliances with Spanish and British. On August 30th, Chiefs Peter McQueen and Red Eagle attacked Fort Mims north of Mobile, killing more than 400 women and children. General John Floyd won the Battle of Ottoesee. Major General Andrew Jackson, also future president, and Brigadier General John Coffee, under command of 5,000 men, won the Battle of Tolascatchi in Tualahdge. In 1814, Prairie du Chien was under attack. An American sent a relief force, but was defeated at the Battle of Rock Island Rapids. A second force was sent on September 1814, but defeated at the Battle of Credit Island. And it was led by Zachary Taylor, also the future president. The Americans believed by taking more of the Providence would force the British to cede the rest of it. The end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1814 meant that the British could deploy their army. They wanted to retake Fort Mackinac and invade the Niagara frontier. On July 13th, Americans took Fort Erie, and on July 3rd, that they took Fort Erie. And on July 5th, Winfield Scott won the Battle of Chippewa. An attempt to advance further ended with the hard-fought but inconclusive Battle of Lundy's Lane on July 25th. The battle was fought near Niagara Falls. General Winfield Scott's wounds ended his service in the war, but his military career ended when he died at age 76 on May 29th, 1866. The Americans withstood the siege of Fort Erie on August 14th, 1814. The Americans skirmished with British, then burned Fort Erie, then crossed the Niagara River. The British sent 15,000 troops to North America to defend Lower Canada and gain control over the Great Lakes, but failed, so they decided to invade New York. The British might outnumbered the Americans at the Battle at Plattsburgh. They built a 36-gun frigate HMS Confiance, but was not completed. Master Commandant Thomas MacDonough faced Captain George Downey at the Battle of Plattsburgh. The British lost that battle. Meanwhile, in Maine, the British raided American towns and forts and occupied the town of Casting. They wreaked havoc throughout Maine. Then, the British built the Chesapeake Flotilla and burned and raided towns along the Chesapeake Bay. Then, August 14th, a force of 1,500 men under General Ross had arrived, planning on attacking the capital, Washington, D.C. The flotilla went on with the raid of Alexandria and bested defenders at the Battle of Bladensburg. This opened the road for Washington. Mistakenly thought the army was twice his size, so they left the city. Then the burning of Washington. The British only burned public buildings and left private buildings, but they still wreaked havoc, burning the White House. But then, and this sounds like something out of a fiction movie, a tornado came and it picked up cannons, and the British's heaviest cannons, and tossed them around, killing British troops. They then left the city. This tornado is known as the tornado that saved America. Then, the Battle of Baltimore began when the British landed at North Point, but were met by militia further down the Patapsco Neck Peninsula at the Battle of North Point at Godley Wood, where the British lost. Retreating, they were hoping for a naval attack during the battle, but the Navy was held off at Fort McHenry. While all the lights in the city were extinguished, Fort McHenry was illuminated by the shells exploding over the fort, illuminating the flag. This inspired lawyer Francis Scott Key to write the poem Defense of Fort McHenry. This became set to music and named the Star-Spangled Banner. In January, Floyd's force of 1,300 state militia and 400 Creeks were attacked by the Muskogees. Future President Old Hickory Andrew Jackson led 5,000 militia and Creek and Cherokee warriors to victory in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and then moved his armies to Fort Jackson, where the Treaty of Fort Jackson was signed, which the Creeks were forced to cede their lands to America and to stop trading and communicating with Spanish and British. On July 12th, General Jackson complained to Governor of West Florida, Mateo Gonzalez Manrique, at Pensacola, that combats were harbored in Spanish territory, a British presence in West Florida, but the Spanish were in a weak position, so they asked for help from the British. The British attacked Fort Bower, starting the Gulf Campaign outside Mobile, hoping to take Mobile, but failed. Then the Americans, under James Wilkinson, took Pensacola. Actually, James Wilkinson had been a Spanish spy his whole military career, and he took the Spanish city. And they succeeded. And the American force moved to New Orleans in late 1840. Then, The Battle of New Orleans was fought on January 8, 1815, between the British Army under Major General Sir Edward Pakenham and the United States Army under Brevet Major General Andrew Jackson, roughly 5 miles southeast of the French quarter of Louisiana, in the current suburb of Chalmette, Louisiana. The battle was the climax of the 5-month Gulf Campaign, September 1814 to February 1815, by Britain to try to take New Orleans, West Florida, and possibly Louisiana territory, which began at the First Battle of Fort Bower. Britain started the New Orleans campaign on December 14, 1814, at the Battle of Lake Borgne. The numerous skirmishes and artillery duels happened in the weeks leading up to the final battle. The battle took place 15 days after the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, which formally ended the War of 1812 on December 24, 1814, though it would not be ratified by the United States, and therefore did not take effect until February 16, 1815, as news of the agreement had not yet reached the United States from Europe. Despite a British advantage in numbers, in training, and experience, the British forces defeated a poorly executed assault in slightly more than 30 minutes. The Americans suffered 71 casualties, while the British suffered 2,000, including the deaths of Pakenham and second-in-command Major General Samuel Gibbs, who both died in the beginning of the battle. Failure to keep the right bank, and they retreated and failed to use artillery on American lines, and poor execution in general of timing. They failed to keep element of surprise, and the bad luck, the fog let up when they were 500 yards away, and confusion also had some effect. As well, the Americans had larger guns and more such as 32-pounder Jackson had in his arsenal, and the British failed to breach the earthworks that were heavily built and professionally. So with artillery, it was deadly. Those earthworks were actually built by everybody of New Orleans. Slaves, pirates, civilians, soldiers, you name it. A ton of different people built them. The main attack began in darkness and heavy fog, but the fog lifted as the British neared the main American line, exposing them to wizard artillery fire. The British column had already been disordered by artillery fire, and the British it had already been disordered by the passage of 300 returning to the redoubt, and they advanced into the storm of American fire. Without the fascines and ladders, they were unable to scale and storm the American position. The British forces fell into confusion, thrown to disorder by the flight of the advance guard. Most of the senior officers were killed or wounded, including Major General Samuel Gibbs, who was killed leading the main attack column on the right, and Colonel Rennie, who led detachment on the left river. Mullins had comprised their attack. Highlanders of the 93rd Regiment of the Foot were ordered to leave Keene's assault column, advancing along the river, possibly because of Thornton's delay in crossing the river, in the artillery fire that might hit them, and to move across the open field to join the main force on the right. Keene fell wounded as he crossed the field with the 93rd, Rennie's men managed to attack and overrun an American advance redoubt next to the river, but they could neither hold the position nor successfully storm the American main line behind it. Without reinforcements, within a few minutes, the American 7th U.S. Infantry arrived, moved forward, and fired upon the British in the captured redoubt. Within half an hour, Rennie and nearly all his men were dead in the main attack. On the right, the British infantrymen flung themselves to the ground, huddled in the canal, or were mowed down by a combination of musket fire and grape shot from the Americans. Another reason for losses for the British was after their failure to breach the parapet, it resulted in British soldiers marching into a kill zone with artillery and musket fire and grape shot volleys. Jackson became a national hero after the Battle of New Orleans. At Fort St. Philip, the Royal Navy bombarded the fort, but the Navy retreated. The British started taking the Georgian coast, freeing slaves. At the battles of Sancoe and the Battle of Côte Sans Dessin were at Illinois, the Americans clashed with the Sauk tribe. Then word of the treaty got out. The British ceded the land they had taken from America, and the Americans had ceded the land they had taken from the British. But the Spanish ceded Florida over to the Americans. And that was the end of the War of 1812. Now, I'll read the first part of the Treaty of Ghent. Now, I will read the beginning of the Treaty of Ghent. Treaty of Peace and Amity between His Britannic Majesty and the United States of America. His Britannic Majesty and the United States of America, desirous of terminating the war, which was unhappily subsided between the two countries, and of restoring upon principles of perfect reciprocity, peace, friendship, and good understanding between them have for that the purpose appointed by their respective plenipotentiaries, that is to say, His Britannic Majesty on his part has appointed the Right Honourable James Lord Gambier, late Admiral of the Red Squadron of His Majesty's fleet, Henry Goulburn, Esquire, a member of the Imperial Parliament under Secretary of State William Adams, Esquire, Doctor of Civil Laws, and the President of the United States, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. Has appointed John Quincy Adams, James A. Bayard, Henry Clay, Jonathan Russell, and Albert Gallatin, citizens of the United States, who, after a reciprocal communication of their respective full powers, have agreed upon the following articles. Well, that's the beginning of the Treaty of Ghent. I will not read the following articles because that would take a really long time. But with that being said, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe and share with a friend. If they won't listen, share with an enemy. Also, thanks to Arvidorius for helping co-editing and research. Well, happy Independence Day. And with that being said, Briggs out.